Thank you everyone for being here. So I wanted to start with Jojo Lapa. My name is Bamina Ranjit. I work at Mothers Out Front as a multimedia story producer. I'm located here in New York City, Manhattan Island, land of Lenape people. I'm also an Indigenous woman belonging to a community called Nawars, the original inhabitants of now the capital of Nepal called Kathmandu. I'm honored and privileged to be hosting this webinar along with my coworkers and friends, Adelita Serena and Desiree Shelley, who are climate justice organizers at Mothers Out Front and Indigenous women and leaders in their community. Today is a very exciting day for us as we are hosting this webinar in honor of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, the day to celebrate and honor our mother that is this planet, and to support the virtual climate strike led by youth by celebrating Indigenous voices. One may ask, who are Indigenous people? We identify ourselves by our bond with the land and our distinct culture and its historic continuity with pre-colonial and pre-settler society. We are approximately 370 million Indigenous people, occupying 20% of the Earth's territory, spread out in 70 different countries, all with unique tradition, beliefs, languages, cultural characteristics. This webinar was put together with an intention to celebrate Indigenous culture and its connection to Earth, and to talk about some of the issues Indigenous communities have been working on, and to make an intersection between the current pandemic and climate crisis. Our program will start with a brief introduction of Adelita Serena and Desiree Shelley, followed by individual introduction of our four speakers in chronological order. They are Morningstar Gali, Millie Trevino Sucedo, Supriya Patel, and Beth Roach, who will each speak for about 10 minutes. For closing, we'll have a slide with links and information of our speakers and contact information from Mothers Out Front. If you may have any questions and concerns, you can reach out to us. So let's get started. Next up, you'll hear from Adelita Serena. So to you, Adelita.
Hi, everybody. Hello, relatives. My name's Adelita Serena. I'm an organizer for Mothers Out Front here in the Capital Region. And before I continue, I want to acknowledge the Patwin people that are the original people of the area in which I reside here in Northern California. And I also want to acknowledge all the ancestors from wherever you are tuning in from. I'm from the Mexica Nation and I'm happy that you all are tuning in to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which many Indigenous communities have been celebrating all year long for as long as we have existed. And my elders have always said, Earth Day is every day. And they have always said, Mother's Day is every day. See how that relates? Wise words to live by, everybody. And today we lift up and celebrate Indigenous voices and voices of color, which are and continue to be voices on the front lines of climate change and those being hit hardest by COVID-19. And before I introduce our speaker, I'm gonna let Desiree introduce herself as well. Thank you. Desiree.
Hi, my name is Desiree Shelley. Thank you so much, Adelita and Bamina, for such a wonderful introduction. I'll be brief here. I am a climate justice organizer also with Mothers Out Front, and I am located in Roanoke, Virginia, and I'm also a member of the Monacan Indian Nation. We are an Eastern Siouan group in Virginia, and so to provide a brief land acknowledgement and background, our community, tribal grounds are in Amherst, Virginia, which is part of our ancestral homeland, and many members of our community still reside throughout our original lands of the Virginia Piedmont and the mountains, which span from the fall line at Richmond and west through the Blue Ridge Mountains. I also want to acknowledge too that there are many other Indigenous Algonquian and Iroquoian groups in Virginia. So that is my land acknowledgement, and thank you so much for joining us today.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and introduce our first speaker, who is an incredible advocate for the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement, has been on the forefront of defending salmon and water rights, along with other key tribal leaders, is a member of the Pit River Band of California Indians, and project director, here we go, yay, I love that slide, project director for Restoring Justice for Indigenous Peoples, is also coordinator for the Sunrise Thanks-Taking ceremony on Alcatraz Island for the last 12 years, and tribal youth advocate, and the list goes on and on. Please help me in welcoming Morningstar Galley.
Thank you so much, Adelita. Chimisanwi, it is great to be included in this conversation with all of you. So thank you to all of you for all of your hard work in putting this together. Thank you to Adelita for reaching out. My name is Morningstar Gali. I am Ajumawi Band of Pit River. Our tribe resides in Northeastern California, up by Mount Shasta, and covers, our ancestral territory covers the what is now known as the county areas between Lassen, Shasta, Modoc, and Siskiyou counties. So I'm going to talk a bit about the impacts on the impacts of climate change and how that relates to what we are dealing with now with COVID-19, and how that continues to impact our tribal communities. California tribes are very unique and diverse. I think there's a couple of slides, if you could start the slideshow.
Logan, were you able to get the slides in?
If not, it's okay.
Yes, just give me 1 second.
Sure.
And just while people are waiting, I just want to let everybody know any links will also be a slide included at the end. If there's something missing, I will create a page for the additional links on our Facebook page.
So you can go to indigenousjustice.org for more information. And so I am the project director for Restoring Justice for Indigenous Peoples, but also, as Adelita mentioned, I help to support and work for a number of different organizations here in California. So I work as a tribal water organizer for Save California Salmon, and also as a tribal liaison for the International Indian Treaty Council. And so if we can go to the next slide, I just wanted to show how California tribes are very unique and diverse, that we have, this shows our cultural areas, that we have 109 tribes throughout California that are known as federally recognized, and that we have over 50 tribes that are considered NFR or non-federally recognized. And so the current impacts of COVID-19 right now, that many of the non-federally recognized tribes that are 1/3 of California tribes, that what they are dealing with is that they were not included in the CARES Tribal Set-Aside Act. And so that includes unacknowledged tribes, non-federally recognized tribes, terminated tribes, disenrolled and disenfranchised tribal members. And so our efforts as of right now has been to help to gather support and gather resources for those tribal peoples and families that are being impacted at this time. And so in terms of the climate change impacts, the right to food for Indigenous peoples is a collective, or actually, I'm sorry, if we could go to the next slide and just talk about, so this is California's first governor, Governor Burnett, that declared that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the two races until the Indian race becomes extinct, and that must be expected. And so that was the state of the address from the first governor of California, Burnett. As of this past year, we received an apology from Governor Newsom here in California, but that apology has not been backed up with action. And so I'm going to talk about some of the impacts that we're still dealing with paternalistic federal Indian policy and how that continues to impact California tribes. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to share a couple of photos. These are the waterways from my homeland. This is the Hat Creek and Burney Creek and Pitt Rivers that surround our homelands, waters that we go to swim in and that we gather at, that we take our children to go fishing at, and how they're continuing to be impacted today. So the right to food for Indigenous peoples is a collective right, and based on our special spiritual relationship with Mother Earth, based on our lands and territories, our environment and natural resources that provide our traditional nutrition, which nourishes our cultures, languages, social life, worldview, and our relationship with the Mother Earth. The denial of the right to food denies us our physical survival, social organization, cultures, traditions, languages, spirituality, sovereignty, and our total identity. And so the denial of the right to food is a denial of our collective Indigenous existence. And so this is from the first Indigenous Peoples Global Consultation on the Right to Food and Food Sovereignty in Guatemala from 2002, that for Indigenous peoples, the rights to land, water, and territory, as well as the right to self-determination, are essential for the full realization of our food security and food sovereignty. And so the impacts of climate change include a growing threat to food security and the right to food for Indigenous peoples, that Indigenous nations and peoples around North America are experiencing the impacts of climate change in their communities and traditional lands. This includes the disappearance of traditional subsistence foods, including wild game, fish, berries, wild plants, and traditional food crops and plant medicines. Water levels are rising in coastal areas and water tables. Lakes, streams, rivers, and springs are being diminished inland. If we can go to the next slide, please. So Indigenous peoples' adaptation strategies, they include the continued practice of our ceremonies, dances, prayers, songs, and stories, and other cultural traditions related to the use of traditional foods and subsistence practices, the adaptability, resilience, resistance, and restoration of our tribal food and traditional food use and production in response to these changing conditions are indicator areas for cultural indicators for food security, food sovereignty, and sustainable development. So what we're seeing here within California is decreased snowmelts within the Sierra and upswelling along the coast impact natural systems, salmon runs, wetlands, oak woodlands that are culturally and economically important to us as Native peoples. The rising sea levels due to global warming threaten low-lying areas such as the Bay Area tidal marshes that are critical habitat for endangered culturally and commercially viable species of fish and wildlife, and then the biological impact to our salmon. And so as the majority of our tribes, as Northern California tribal peoples, that we are salmon peoples. And so within my homeland for the past 80 years, we have not had salmon in our rivers. And so what does that look like to be salmon peoples, to have the essence of that within us and to no longer have salmon within our rivers? That we, there's been this big push against PG&E in these last few years with the large fires. But our tribe has been fighting PG&E for the past 80 years because the fulfillment to instill fish ladders within our rivers, those promises were made and they were never fulfilled. And so what does the biological impact of salmon look like at this time? It's the overall warming, decrease in snow and ice levels, the greater variability in annual precipitation, increased runoff and spring discharge, increases in sea levels, ocean acidification, changes in offshore upwelling, and then already the threat of dams, water diversion, logging, and pollution, climate change in oaks, and then more frequent fires as we've seen, the threat of habitat by fragmentation, disease, and lack of regeneration. And so there's a prediction that I pulled this from 2011, that the change in large fire frequency, as we've already seen within 50 years in 2050, that there will be a 55% increase in large wildfires. And we've already seen that occur. And then the final slide that I wanted to address is the fish versus farms narrative. And so we see our governor at this time pandering to big agriculture and utilizing Indigenous peoples who have always had a right to migrate. And as Indigenous peoples, we are being left out of the conversations in terms of pitting communities against one another, Indigenous communities that do not have access to clean drinking water and do not have access to food security. And so some of the updates that we have are that the Sites Reservoir will have a new EIR to come out soon. They have decided to make the reservoir smaller and change operations. And so what's happening right now is that this is being prioritized as essential planning, even though we are in the shutdown. The Delta Tunnel comment period, which ended last Friday, despite the request for a delay, they have been designing and planning the intakes. And the response from DWR was that the tunnel is essential and that people can engage online, which is not a reality because so many of our communities do not have that access. Many tribes could not comment to the timeline as many fisheries people are helping with relief efforts or deemed non-essential. And so the state water plan was approved during the last month and is in effect. The state litigated and is trying to get an injunction against the Trump water plan, but it is in effect. The Klamath Dam removal project, the water quality permit was approved by the state this month, and we are waiting for FERC to approve this license transfer to the dam removal entity. Klamath flows to stop fish kills are currently in litigation and plans are changing daily. And then FERC approved the Pacific Connector pipeline and Jordan Cove, which goes under the Klamath River, despite the state denying all permits the day after the national lockdown began. And we are petitioning for a rehearing. The project is petitioning to waive the state's authority. This would be the biggest carbon emitter in Oregon and would go over 200 waterways. And then how, again, COVID-19 is affecting tribes. And so this is directly from the Tataviam tribe, that the tribe is concerned about unacknowledged tribes having been left out of the CARES tribal set-aside programs, and that as unacknowledged tribes, they do not operate Indian health service clinics and have historically been deemed ineligible. And so just wanted to share all of that. And I think there's some links that will be shared for further information.
Thank you, Morningstar. Yes, very concerning trend that we're seeing, you know, things that were in litigation or being put on hold, now getting the green light while we are in this pandemic. And this is something to keep an eye out. If you're out there watching, know that we will be sharing out links. If anything got missed, I will be creating a page with additional links where you can go inform yourself or support efforts to resist these actions. And so we're gonna go ahead and segue into our next speaker. Thank you, Morningstar. This is a great segue because you did mention, you know, agriculture and field workers are actually one of the places being impacted. And so we're going to hear from an amazing woman who I have had the honor of knowing for many years, so many years. I'm like, I was a young girl in Coachella Valley marching alongside Cesar Chavez when I first met Mili Trevino, who is the founder of Líderes Campesinas, is a fierce advocate for survivors of rape in the fields, is also currently the executive director of Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, a consultant at National Latino Alliance to End Domestic Violence, is the former investigator at Southern Poverty Law Center, and again, an advocate for migrant workers. Please help me in welcoming Mili Trevino.
Hola, gracias Adelita. Thank you very much for inviting. And yes, we know each other. You were much younger. Gracias for inviting, and thanks for having me here. I wanted to share and bring about that Alianza Nacional de Campesinas is a 15-member organization. We represent farmer girl women in 11 different states and many more, but where we have the presence, it's it's more in those 11 states. Of course, California, where I'm residing right now, where Líderes Campesinas and then Campesinos Sin Fronteras. There's just in the Pharmaco Association of Florida, upstate New York. There's several organizations. So what I'm going to share is not only the current challenges during this pandemic. You can see in the slide how workers are being asked to continue working. I mean, it's there's very little protection or not at all. And many companies, I'm not saying that all companies, but many companies that we have heard where the women, we have more than 50 audio and or visual recordings of Pharmaco women sharing their testimonies, very worried about their health and in terms of being because of the lack of protections in the workplace. It's not only the physical distancing that needs to be happening, which we call the social distancing, but it's also how their companies, many more times, many of them, not all, but many of them, are not providing clean restrooms. They're not providing the health and safety, the sanitation for workers to have water to wash their hands and soap, much less, and towels to dry their hands. And at the same time, I mean, all this are issues that we have had all along, issues that had been happening and that many more times companies are more worried about how their crop is going to be planted, worked with, and harvested so that they can sell. And the worry here is that because the majority of the workers working in the fields and packing houses and canneries and nurseries might not have the health insurance. So there's workers working, having different kinds of illnesses coming into work because they need to have the earnings. And there's a large number of Pharmaco women that are single moms, which means they're head of households and that cannot depend on who can support them also. So at the same time, right now with this pandemic, some of the other challenges that the women are facing is what is happening with their children. There's no classes, so that they can't come at times because the children are not going to classes. The daycares, if they are lucky enough to have a daycare and take their children to the daycare, if the daycares are closed, which they are, then they're keeping their children at home and with the vulnerability of what will happen with their children and being taken care of maybe by babysitters or are taking care of other children that might not know how to deal with this pandemic at the same time. So it's so hard. I mean, if you can turn if we have more slides, please, so I can continue sharing. Some of the things that the women have done, because we work a lot with our community. It's Pharmaco women working with Pharmaco women. And what they decided, because they're not given the masks, and many places they're not even given the gloves or to work. And the gloves is whoever knows about doing the work in the fields, they know that those gloves are not going to last more than 3 hours. But it's once a week, many times they get gloves, if they get any, and masks if they don't. The women are trying to make their own masks, not only to protect their families, but to protect other coworkers. And what they're doing is trying to deliver. We've developed this campaign called the Aliento para Familias Campesinas. That means providing health or providing hope with Pharmaco families. And this is where they put them in small bags, and I can show if that can be seen, so that they could be also, and they're trying to work as many places in terms of food banks to make sure that they take the food to remote places where farm worker women don't, and their families might not have vehicles to go get food. And sometimes they're having the women working in hours in terms of 10 to 12 hours. So by the time they try to get to a store or a supermarket, most of the shelves are the essential food is gone. So some of the ways that we work in terms of as we like working, most of our organizations like to do reflection when we are going to start whatever kind of event or ceremony. We read our mission, and then we do the Mística. The Mística is a reflection of who we are, where we're coming from, and if we can continue. I mean, you can see in some of those slides some of the ways the women connect in terms of. I mean, we've done also webinar presentations trying to give visibility to our the work that our member organizations have been doing because of the current situation. And so we're trying our best. Now, can we continue? I mean, with the slides? Okay, so some of the things that I wanted to share very quickly is how the women in all these different organizations, there's many farmworker women that have created either community gardens or their own garden behind in their backyard. And you can see some pictures there. You can see some children doing the harvesting, because it's what we call quote unquote organic. We call it having the work done in our homes and as community gardens as the natural food. What we eat is we're very connected to earth. We love to work in terms of watching the seed start blossoming into a plant, and then the plant building the flowers or the fruit, the bunches. It all depends on if it's a fruit and vegetable. Can we go ahead with the next slide? If there's any other slides. You can see some of the seeds. As we all know, I mean, who's ever working with the problems of seeds, we have lost many seeds because of big companies, kind of like Monsanto, that are buying all this and trying to create seeds that are not creating more seeds with our products. So we're trying to do that conservation. We have people that are listening or hearing us right now. There are also women that have been working on preparing the land, and that are doing the huertos comunitarios, which in English is called the community gardens. And some of them might be doing chats in terms of sharing information. Is there any more slides that we can use right here? Because I know, okay, we've been doing a lot of rising. Of course, we've been working with the 1 billion rising with Evensler, now known as V. This is a famous work done at an international level. With Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, we've been connecting with women in other countries also, but within here in the United States, we are trying to work, giving out information, trying to push public officials to do their job in our counties, in our hometowns, because the information is not reaching farmworker women, they're not reaching our families, and we're trying to make sure that they're not only speaking in presentations, but also hearing what our community really needs. That we need the protective equipment, that we need the social distancing, and that we need OSHA to step up and monitor and provide and do the enforcement and start finding all these companies, because we have had many workers that, because we just started the harvesting seasons, of the peak harvesting seasons. And right now, if we already have many farm workers getting ill because of the lack of protections that are happening in the workplace, the seasons that start heavily, not only in California, but throughout the United States, are going to start at the end of the spring, all summer, and at the beginning of the fall. if we do not have workers, farm workers working the land, providing and harvesting the fruits and vegetables, we're not going to have food in our tables. So let's try to protect our workers, and we're pushing for various. I mean, look at our Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, which is our website, and you're going to find a lot more information that we're working on, and also about our campaigns and who we are supporting in terms of legislation. We're very much interested in making sure that because 65% of farm workers are undocumented out of the 2.5 million or more, because many of them are in hiding, and especially women are not going to get the stimulus to try to push for the not only the local public officials, but Congress people to really step up and say farm workers, agricultural workers, workers that are essential workers, which we have been all our lives, but right now they're only having us as essential workers just because we need to provide food to be on the table. But we need to make sure that workers are also protected and that get the stimulus or some kind of stipend because they need a lot of support. Thank you. Gracias, Adelita.
Gracias, Millie. Tlazokamati. Thank you so much, Millie. Incredible work. A very important and critical message at this time. Food and water and land is our life source. And the folks, our family, our relatives that are out there harvesting, it is because of them that we're able to eat. We need to protect workers. Critical message. Again, the links will be at the end. Anybody watching who has questions is watching live on Facebook. Please, place questions in the chat option there. And at the end, we'll be able to interact with you via any submitted questions. Thank you so much, Millie. Our next speaker, I'm so humbled and honored to know and have worked with alongside on the youth climate strikes last year at the state capitol. I'm talking about Supriya Patel, a 14-year-old youth activist who has founded the Sacramento chapter of Fridays for Future, is also partnerships coordinator at Earth Uprising. And just a little personal insight, I testified at the Sacramento City Council during when it was up to vote whether they were going to declare a climate emergency. And the mayor noted that he was pushed by the youth climate activists. So bravo to our youth climate activists. You are critical to the movement, and your voice is heard by some of these adults on a different level. So please help me in welcoming Supriya Patel.
Thank you so much for that intro, Adelita. I kind of want to start off by telling my climate story, because I feel like in the climate movement, our stories are incredibly powerful. And I thank all of the wonderful people who have told really poignant and powerful stories so far. So when I was 10 years old, I went to India for the first time, which is where my grandparents grew up. And I was super excited to go out of the country and to visit a new place. And I kind of had dreams about seeing the Taj Mahal, and everybody was going to look like me, and my grandparents were going to show me where they grew up. And I was super excited, and the trip was lovely, but I realized while I was there just the impact that air pollution has on everybody in a lot of different parts of India. And as somebody who struggles with asthma, that was a really hard pill for me to swallow, because I had to wear a scarf over my mouth, and I couldn't go outside, and I had asthma attacks even inside. And I'm very privileged because I was able to kind of just jump on a plane and leave after a few weeks, but I know that a lot of my relatives were not able to. So I would later learn that pollution was just a symptom of a larger issue, which is the climate crisis. And when I was 10 years old and I went to India, I didn't really know what that word meant. I had heard about it, but I had never been formally taught about it in school, which I think is one of the larger problems that we're facing today is lack of climate education, because we are never formally taught about any of this. So that kind of planted a seed in my brain that kind of started my concern over the climate crisis. But I didn't really think that as a young person I could do anything, because I looked at these big green groups like Sierra Club and Greenpeace, and to me, the climate movement kind of seemed like something that was very white and that was mostly older folks. So I'm very thankful that now there are all of these wonderful youth groups. But I kind of kept that in mind, and in 2018, the Paradise Fire and the campfire, as it's called, kind of pushed me to my breaking point. I realized that in Sacramento, because we're only 2 hours away from Paradise, California, we were getting a lot of smoke, and that had a huge impact on my everyday life and the lives of all of my friends and family. Our school was canceled, and my friend even jokingly wrote a song about how hard it was to breathe. It was wild, but I couldn't really feel too bad for myself, because I knew that in Paradise, people's entire lives had been reduced to ash, which was just unfathomable for me. So I would realize that fires like these are going to become more frequent due to the climate crisis, and they're going to become our new normal. We saw that with fires in 2019, like the Kincaid fire in Sonoma County, and this is going to keep happening. So I founded Fridays for Future Sacramento, which is, I highly encourage you guys to check us out. We're a really cool youth-led climate organization that fights for climate justice by sharing our stories and also by organizing events like youth climate strikes, as Alita mentioned in her intro of me. And I would later kind of get involved in this youth climate organization called Earth Uprising, which advocates for climate education and really focuses on how education leads to action. And we're incorporating social justice into our curriculums as well as climate science. So I really, from that point on, I kind of dove in head first. And I know that I had wanted to take action for a very long time, but I didn't really know how. So for all of you guys who want to take action within the Sacramento area, I just want to take a little bit of time to shout out some really awesome climate groups that you can get involved with. So in terms of youth climate groups, there is Sunrise Movement Sacramento and Fridays for Future Sacramento. Check out our website. It's fridaysforfuturesac.org. And there's a group called 350 in Sacramento that does a lot of work, as well as Mothers Out Front and the Sacramento Climate Coalition. So I highly encourage all of you to get involved with those groups. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for listening to this webinar, and thanks to all of the other speakers who have told such awesome stories.
Thank you, Supriya. You've been an amazing leader for our youth climate movement. Desiree, would you please introduce our next speaker?
And thank you to Supriya. That was amazing. I really enjoyed hearing your climate story as well. And I feel like I connected with you at a level, even though it's the first time I've ever met you. So thank you for that. Okay, so I am very excited and honored to introduce our next guest, Beth Roach, who will be speaking in part about the Alliance of Beekeepers, of which she is the co-founder. And it is through this endeavor of reconnecting with our spiritual bonds to seeds that she and I connected in person for the first time about a little over 2 years ago, when, of course, not surprisingly, we participated in a seed planting ceremony together outside of Richmond. Beth also currently serves as the Development Associate of Sierra Club's Virginia chapter, as well as a program lead for Women's Earth Alliance and Sierra Club's U.S. Grassroots Accelerator Program. Beth is an experienced fundraiser, community organizer, and environmental justice advocate, as well as a storyteller on energy and environmental issues. Beth has also worked for the James River Association, Mothers Out Front, and Virginia State Parks. She is an enrolled member of the Nottoway Indian Tribe of Virginia. And since 2010, she has served on their tribal council and managed environmental initiatives for the tribe. Beth has also chaired the Virginia Council on Environmental Justice since 2018. And as I mentioned, she's a co-founder of the Alliance of Native Seedkeepers, which is an intertribal business that promotes preservation of Indigenous seedkeeping and lifeways. So as a fellow seedkeeper and a big fan of Beth, I'm really excited to hear from her now. Thanks, Beth.
Nawe, Desiree, Adelita, all my wonderful panelists. Wow. Joa, that's gonna kiase Beth Roach. I'm so delighted to be here, and I'm wishing you all well. I'm so happy to see you all alive and well, and I'm asking if we're at peace, and that's a loaded question right now. You know, there's just so much going on in all of our communities, and there's so many intersections between what we're seeing with the virus and climate crisis, and with the struggles that Indigenous people across the world have been enduring because of capitalism for so many centuries. I'd like to start with, we can bring up my slides if that's available. If not, I can always roll with it too. But I'm Iroquois woman, Haudenosaunee, Longhouse, traditional, and I'd love to take this opportunity. I'm on the edge of Desiree's territory, so Nawe, Desiree, I'm in Richmond. And to the southeast of me is where my people are from. We're just actually down in one of our gardens today. And then to the east, we have Algonquian speaking folks. And so we'd just love to present, so we can still, yeah, we can stay there. Just want to start with the Haudenosaunee abbreviated Thanksgiving address in Nottoway. We are revitalizing our language. And so it starts with and so I'm just so grateful for all of y'all. So we're calling in attention to the people that are here, and all of you listening and watching. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. We see you and we love you. So now we're like looking at the Mother Earth. Adelita, perfect way to describe that. Mother Earth every day, Mother's Day, Earth Day. Really appreciating the earth that we stand on. So we're looking at our water now, and we all know how important water is to all of us. And so we're just very grateful for that. And with every line, we are inviting each other to become one mind with all of the elements that we live in. And our Thanksgiving address goes on and on and on. And those are some beginning highlights for y'all. And you know, the work that I do with the Alliance Native Seedkeepers is deeply rooted with the foundations of the Longhouse traditional culture of Haudenosaunee people. We can show you the next slide. So when we think about our story of creation, and I hope that many of you have heard about Sky Woman, I would love to have all the time in the world to tell you about it, but you know, look it up or reach out to me, I'll tell you the whole story. But we all start up in Sky World, and so you can see the Pleiades, Seven Sisters constellation up there, and there's a celestial tree in the middle of Sky World, and that's what gives us like all of our life, like all of our fruits and vegetables and medicines. And one night Sky Woman has a dream that this has to be uprooted. This is a very serious dream, and so they make it happen. There's different versions of the story. So some say that she fell while looking, and some say that she jumped. And I tend to believe that both could be true, because I definitely feel like that's true in my life, where sometimes I slip into things and sometimes I dive head first. But regardless, she's grabbing seas as she's going down, and she's falling down to just a nothing but a water world where there's water critters that are already there. And so they start to work together and scheme and figure out, how are we going to support this two-legged being that's falling from Sky World down to the earth? And they work together. And then what happens is she's landing on Turtle's back, and she's so excited, she does a dance, and she starts to create the world. And with her, you can go to the next slide. You might see she's with child as she's falling. She's on Earth now, and she has this daughter. Has a daughter. Daughter then has twins, good mind and bad mind. That's not the very best interpretation, good and bad. So we would like for you just to think of, you know, if there's a raspberry, then you have like the fruit, and you also have the thorn, right? So there's different elements of our beings. And when Sky Woman's daughter has her sons. She dies in childbirth. These are all long stories. I'm just giving you super brief, but you can see what grows from her grave are corn, bean, and squash, our sustainers. So the very beginning of our whole being is that we are supposed to work together, that we have that proof. We have this interrelationship that's developed. And then when she's bringing seeds down with her, the wisdom that she brings with her is that these are seeds that are precious and we're supposed to share them, and we're definitely not supposed to waste them. So that is just like super ancient history, right? Fast forward to modern days, and we've had, you know, quite a bit of occupation and oppression throughout our time. Next slide. You know, we're here on the East Coast. We're in Virginia and North Carolina. That's where the Alliance of Native Seed Keepers formed. I'm giving you a quick timeline of this too, but you know, growing up, I always heard about the American Indian movement and Alcatraz, and you know, was always just so taken by that. And what I didn't know as much about until, you know, the past few years is that the American Indian movement also took over the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so if you see that black and white or the brown and white photo down there, you see Tuscarora written on the wall. My fiance, who is a seed keeper for over a decade, started doing this work, and he's Tuscarora, and you know, shared the story of how they reclaimed some red corn seed from the BIA. Because you know, they came for the land and they came for the resources and they came for our shamans, right? And they took away our languages and they took away our seeds. Like that foodways, that cultural connectivity was absolutely foundational. It's part of the colonizer's textbook, playbook, right? So during this American Indian movement, you know, they take back the seeds and they bring it back to North Carolina. And there's a family that's been taking care of them for a long time. And interestingly enough, too, there's a Tuscarora red corn prophecy that describes how the corn was giving to the Tuscarora people, and with the acknowledgement that you can have this as long as you're working together and everybody's getting along. But as soon as there's discord, then you're going to lose it. And it's not until you come back together that you're going to regain peace. Next slide. So I would say in Virginia, North Carolina, there's been the steady increase of revitalization of our culture. And you know, for us in Virginia, we didn't have any recognized tribes until the 80s, except for 2 reservation tribes. We're still constantly fighting the appropriate places in history books and telling the full story. Many people from Virginia will tell you that basically we learned about Pocahontas and Powhatan, and that was it. And basically, you know, we all just pilgrims, etc. And that was all. And that, you know, for people like me and Desiree, we were like, absolutely not. Like, we know there's so much more to the story. We know that our people are still here. We know this, we see it, we look in the mirror, we have our families, but we definitely didn't see ourselves in the full spectrum of history. And I show this slide. This is the Skarori Katanawaga Seed Bank. This is the step before the alliance, where the Tuscarora folks said, okay, well, what can we do to revitalize our culture here? And really, one of the strongest ways to do that is to reconnect to your seeds, which then reconnects to your ancestors, to your migration patterns, to all of the life ways that have kept us together. So, but you know, this hasn't been without problems. You see the middle picture up top is where a garden down in North Carolina was firebombed, and it got very close to the garden where there are a lot of really important endangered seeds were being grown. But then you also see where sowing these seeds is also a place of healing. And so in the top right, you see folks planting corn. And if you can see the historical marker, the New Aroka, that's, you know, another big battle that no one talks about. But that site where they're planting is that site, that massacre site. And so, you know, not only are we working to just remember those seeds and those stories, but we're, you know, it's definitely a connection between the land and our ancestors. So we like to tell this story too. There's a picture in front of the Capitol, and this is really where the Alliance of Native Seed Keepers starts to grow, because we did see what was happening with Standing Rock and witnessing you know, this amazing connection of all these people from all over. And we also knew that we had the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, threatening our lands. And, you know, we were trying to think of, well, what's a way for us to start to communicate? And so from Skarori Katanawaga Seed Bank, conversations began with seed keepers in Virginia and North Carolina, which started the Coalition of Woodland Nations, which got just a lot more conversation going, because basically it was the people that were already in the fight to reclaim our history, reclaim our language and our seeds, and also starting to gear up and say like, okay, we're done being, cast aside or not being listened to. And so we started to, work together to really kind of beef up our advocacy in a lot of different ways. So you can see next slide. Desiree's people have been so instrumental. The Monacan Nation is so strong, and the Iroquois tribes here, not only Meher and Tuscarora, we've been very connected with the Monacan for a long time. Our two other co-founders are Vicki Ferguson and Dwayne, and Desiree, I think it's 2 years today that we had that ceremony. Thank you, Facebook memory. But yeah, so just acknowledge that that our people have been connected for a while. And in this picture, not only are we talking about seeds, Vicki Ferguson is doing her traditional planting that her grandmothers taught her. They have this beautiful Tutelo red corn that has been brought back to a healthier number than, it's not ready for everybody to have it, but it's in a more stable place now. But there's some sites here that are important to note. So there's a fight going on right now with the Monacan, who are protecting the capital site of Rossawick. That's a John Smith map, and if you're in Virginia, that means everything. But it's there, like they have it indicated that this is the capital site. There's a proposed water pump station to go there, and despite huge opposition from the Monacan Nation. And in the bottom picture, you have Vicki Ferguson talking to our governor right now, Governor Northam, and in that visit, she pointed to the site and she said, if that was a Civil War site, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So, I mean, truly speaking truth to power and saying like, this in the face of the history of we have here in Virginia, like we're not going to be bystanders anymore. This other amazing feature here is Natural Bridge. And if you go through that walkway, it's just first, it's just this amazing place. It's when you turn the corner and you see that site, you just feel the power that comes from it. It's now a state park, and Vicki manages a really amazing living history site there. And we're also working to get that indicated as a cultural resource of the Monacan people. Like it's not just this amazing natural resource, but it's a sacred historic site for the Monacan people. And that's so new for Virginia. Like they're just still, really grappling with the fact that yes, you still have Native people here. And we're also, through our connections, we're learning how to be better advocates together. And so we're supporting each other in ways that that we hope are going to only continue to grow. So the Alliance is a lot. It's a lot about protecting our seeds, and it's a lot about also just infusing that fight with all the other elements that come with being a colonized state for over 400 years. Next slide. So to talk directly about the seeds, the Alliance has started with the Scotto-de-Gatanawaga Seed Bank, that's the Tuscarora community. When Fix came out to Virginia and started working with Monacan and Menottaway, it became intertribal. And then we started to think, well, okay, what we really want to do is get all the seeds back into the hands of the people whose ancestors cultivated them. We want to get them growing again. So our vision is that we have this, this amazing future where Indigenous peoples are living in security of our food and health and culture and environment, and that there's justice and unity. But how do we get there? Is that we're redeveloping our spiritual bonds that our people already have with the seeds. And when we do that, that in turn teaches us how to become, more environmentally conscious in a lot of different ways. But the time is of the essence, because like was mentioned earlier, our seeds are heavily endangered, right? Like growing corn is so hard. Like in this picture, we have Seneca pink lady corn. It's personally one of my very favorites. It's highly endangered. We have a hard time growing corn out because we don't want it to cross, right? And try to find a place that doesn't have corn within 1.5 miles is really difficult. Last summer, with climate crisis, we had a very early heat snap that caused our corn to tassel earlier. And sometimes, I don't know if y'all know this, it's very cool, but you can have different varieties of corn planted offset. So knowing that they might not tassel at the same time because of their growth period, and then they won't cross. But if there's extreme weather or if there's some threat, then they'll send signals to each other to tassel and go ahead and grow. And that's where danger comes in. And so last summer we had a rough time, and We still have another shot at Seneca Pink Lady, but we're hearing here little bits and pieces here and there, folks that have some samples. But this is an example of work that, we're trying to, a seed that we're really trying to keep in healthy numbers so that we can keep it growing and keep that story going for as long as we can. The next slide. But we cannot do this alone, right? Because like we're urban Indians, we're working so hard to get on this like little farm in North Carolina. The seller almost like took back her offer this morning. There's this whole drama thing. So we need so many people growing, and I'm so just so inspired to hear about the community gardens, and that's so important. This year we had set up 3 community gardens, our work projects. We started to work with the Patawomack tribe, an Algonquian speaking tribe in Northern Virginia. And then we have our garden, Nottoway Garden, and then we had another community garden in the city. And so we had done all this outreach because y'all know it's like many hands make light work, and gardening, it's constant. And so we were so excited because we had such great support signed up. But unfortunately with COVID, that has disbanded the gatherings that we could have with the Petawomack and with my tribe, which is a lot of the folks are elders and they're concerned about coming out, and we respect that so much. But this slide really shows the direction that the Alliance is going. And so, we are heavily encouraging our Indigenous people all over to grow your seeds. And then, we would love to, if you need help sourcing seeds, we're going to find that seed for you, and we're going to help you with it. And we're going to connect you with other folks that might have it. We have basically 2 buckets, if you will, of seed banks, or 2 seed banks. One that is strictly dedicated to protection for Indigenous people. And a lot of those seeds are ceremonial, and a lot of them are medicines that will never, ever go to market, like never, like they're only for our people. And then there's another branch of our work, which really, truly was not the focal point. It was a way for us to maintain overhead. I was a grant manager for a long time, so I was like, maybe we shouldn't do a C3 because funding can be fickle. But if we were to become a benefit corporation, we could sell seeds, and we would be, by law, mandated to help our community environment. Well, sweet, that's what we wanted to do anyway. So we launched this seed bank store, seed store, last fall, really just to help us with some overhead costs, because y'all can imagine there's fuel and there's tools that goes along with working with all these different communities. And if you're watching the trends of the markets out there, once people got all their toilet paper, then came for the seeds. So all of a sudden we went from not being known at all. Our website is still under construction because we don't know, we're amateurs. But people are now really recognizing how important it is to have food that you can grow. We're all scared to go to the grocery store. Wouldn't it be nice if our fresh produce was in our backyard? So all of a sudden our seed sales increased. But before we saw that, we were struck with this feeling of, just when the COVID reality really hit, it was what do we do? I think everybody kind of has looked in the mirror and said, what kind of mutual aid can I give? Because we're all just at a loss. For us, we were well, we have seeds. Let's give the seeds out. So we started a campaign that said, okay, if we can't work directly one-to-one with people, with our communities, and show them what we know and share and learn their stories, then we can send seeds to them. We can still send the seeds out. And so we, said for basically every seed packet that you buy, we'll set one aside for our tribal communities. And we kept track of that. And then we sold out, and we're restocking this weekend. And so now we have so many seed bundles that we'll be sending out this summer to tribes in Virginia and North Carolina. And interestingly, this rush to get seeds has connected us with so many other tribal communities, and they're finding out our mission. And we just got a message today about that Seneca Pink Lady Cord. And this lady was like, I have some, amazing, so we're really excited to continue this work in that way. And so lost my train of thought there for a second, but I got excited about the Seneca Pink Lady Cord. It always does it. But we're working hard just to keep people connected. We are so excited to work with Desiree and her people. For an example, I'll just say one more thing, in that, right before the reality of COVID hit, we were all in a group chat, Desiree and me and a couple other seed growers, and we were talking about just the tracking of the climate impacts that we've noticed. And you know, that was such an important conversation because, you know, a lot of us plant by the signs that were taught to us, like the size of the dogwood flower, like, you know, the leaves or size of squirrel's ears and things of that nature. And so while we are working together, we're trying to map out this new reality that we're living in with the climate crisis and helping to shape a whole new traditional ecological knowledge base that we can hopefully continue to pass on to the next generations. And so know that when you support us in our seed store, that work is being redirected into the communities. We're working with some communities to get grants to create a whole tool shed for what they need to do going forward, and just hoping to keep protecting these seeds and keep sharing them amongst all the people. And, you know, I can tell you just personally, working with seeds has been such it's been such medicine during this time, because I mean, truly, like, what's more hopeful than a seed, right? Like, you plant it deep in the soil and it's dark and it doesn't seem like it's going to pop out, but, you know, seeds desperately want to grow. And, you know, we as people, it's our duty to keep them going. And last slide, I think that's what I wanted to say. There's a couple of slides, and so you'll see there's so many beautiful varieties, so many different corns. This doesn't even cover it. You know, there's so many, and then so many different beans too. That's on another slide. And finally, yeah. So, you know, seed keeping is everything, right? Like, it's all of our food, and it's tracing our migration. Like, we can tell kind of who's been hanging out with who because of how your seed traits are popping out. So it's really about keeping us all together and reminding us of who we are and reclaiming that in a way that hasn't been done in years, but it's definitely going stronger, and we're here for y'all. So thanks so very much. I'm deeply honored to be on this panel with you all, and just keep growing, y'all.
Thank you, Beth. Lasso Kamati. I'm gonna hand it over to Bamina to close us up.
Thank you, Alita. It was so nice seeing you, Beth, and, you know, everybody else, meeting you for the first time. It's, like I said, it's a privilege and an honor. I just feel so happy right now, and so, like, my heart is full. I had a quick question for Logan. Do we have some time for questioning, or?
Yes, we do have some time for questions. So if you're listening live on YouTube or Facebook, feel free to send in questions, and we have some time for the folks on the panel to answer. And thank you all again for being here, just sitting here in awe of your knowledge.
Thank you so much, Logan, for making this happen and making things so easy for us and working with us. And while people are sending in their questions through YouTube channels and Facebook channels, which I will keep an eye on, I will go ahead and start just ask like one of the questions that we wanted to ask our guests. So our question was, how can organizations like Mothers Our Friend like help the cause and like grow and support in and kind of be intentional in the conversation of inclusivity? Whoever wants to go first, that's fine. It's cool. Thank you, Millie.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Bimina. In terms of how they can support is supporting some of the legislation that we're trying to make sure that there's enough, so that, and then talk by calling the legislators to really think about our people that don't have the support to try to get the support, because our families are suffering. We're doing essential work. We're doing essential. We're essential, but we're not cared for. And the other is that try to find ways to lift up the work that farm workers are doing and farm worker organizations are doing. If you can also help us with including Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, our website, there's going to be the names of all the organizations that are part of Alianza, and they have their own websites. Or you can also connect with us. There's there's an email that you can try to connect with us. And if you want to donate, hey, please do so, because we're trying to get funding for the organization so that they can, and no one was prepared for this pandemic. So much less organizations like ours that are working with very, very thin strings, a budget. And so for the same reason, we need that kind of support. Thank you.
Thank you, Millie. Logan, we do have a slide with the informations, so maybe we should put that up right now so that the people watching at home can like get the information of the links and the email address.
Sure, let me just pull that up.
Thank you. The question is, how can organizations like Mothers Out Front support solution-based intersectional conversation along? If I could pass it along to one of our guests, is anybody ready? Beth?
Sure, it's a good question, and this could apply to so many other organizations like Mothers Out Front. I would say take the time to develop relationships with the Indigenous groups in your area. Really learn their history, and you might not be, it might not happen quickly, it might not happen overnight, but to do your homework and really understand who is in your territory, whose territory you're in, and also just realize that our folks are dealing with so many different issues all the time, and so it might take a minute for you to find the right person and the larger community to work with, but just trust and know that they're there. And and also please carry with you that there's 400 years of history plus, and that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Desiree and I's people share a lot of the same histories, but then there's also very specific differences between us too, and so it just takes a lot of time to learn, but it's well worth it. And once we can gather again, if there's a powwow, please go and really see like who we are. And that would, absolutely go a long way, I think, before you show up and saying like, come support me in this, or, let's sign on because we need to get that Indigenous box checked. But just make sure that you're really making those efforts well before.
Thank you, Beth. I wanted to ask the same question, but with a little bit of twist for Supriya. The question is, how can organizations like Mothers Out Front support solution-based conversation? But you are leading a youth movement, and you're so young, and you're so amazing, you're so inspiring. So how can Mothers Out Front, like organizations like Mothers Out Front, like support youth-led movement without like kind of taking over the conversation of how the youth wants to take this further?
Yeah, so I feel like it's interesting because we do have a lot of wonderful adult allies trying to help us, but I think that the main thing is to act as a support system, but be mindful of like kind of the space that you're taking up within youth movements, because we always do need adult support. Like, for example, for things like permits and insurance that you have to be 18 to purchase or sign, and always like amplifying on social media and just spreading the word any way you can is always wonderful and is always very helpful. So, yeah.
Can I make a quick announcement? Really quick. There are some links that came my way before I put this link slide up. And so what I just wanted to remind our viewers is that I'm gonna add links to this slide, but on our Mothers Out Front Facebook page, and it's Mothers Out Front Sacramento Woodland Facebook page. So if there is folks asking questions right now how they can connect, and the links here, you can follow through with them, or also I will have additional links that our speakers wanted me to include that didn't make it to this in time. But yeah, just know that you can go to our Facebook page to follow up with those links. But there are some more questions, Bamina, if you could go ahead and ask those to our panelists.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to say, because of the communication gap with the links, what we can do is, our email address is right here. comms@mothersoutfront.org. If you send an email inquiry to us, then we'll send out all the information that we don't have right now, so that it can be just carried through over email. There are a few questions here that came through YouTube and some other channel. There's a question from Facebook. How can individuals help to uplift and assist this essential work? I think it has been answered in many ways, but if somebody wanted to take that and just add something to it.
I'll add to that. I'll just say that, there's my family lives right now. They've lived for the last 15 years on Navajo Nation. That's being severely impacted by COVID-19. And, there is a dire need for support. And so some of the messaging that has come out is solidarity, not charity. And so that we do have, vulnerable communities and populations that are absolutely being impacted, but that, there are definitely ways to support in a way that does not further cause harm to the situations that are already happening.
Thank you so much, Morningstar, and thank you everyone who joined this webinar today. We are feeling very good right now. Our audience is also ecstatic. I can see all the hearts coming in through Facebook and everywhere. Thank you, Logan, for helping us put this show together in such a short notice. I wanted to do a special shout out to strikewithus.org for helping us put this together, and all our guests and my coworkers, Adelita and Desiree. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you again, you all. This was so wonderful and such an important reminder. Like you all talked about, Indigenous people are the original stewards of this land. And that's something that we should remember and recognize on Earth Day. Not just recognize, but actively work to support the essential workers, Indigenous people who are still on this land today and still fighting for decolonization. So thank you again.